What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Health Mastery Show. Today, episode number 30, we have on Dr. Peter Fitschen. Peter is a pro natural bodybuilder. He just literally finished up his competitive season last week, I believe, at the time of recording. He has a PhD in nutritional sciences from the University of Illinois. He has a Master of Science in Biology from the University of Wisconsin, and he has a Bachelor of Biochemistry from the University of Wisconsin also. So in today's episode, we talk all about setting up a contest prep and Peter's approach that he uses with his clients as a full-time coach for getting them ready for show, and he brings in some amazing results. Before we get into the conversation between myself and Peter, I want to talk about a sponsor for this specific podcast, and that is Endeavour Nutrition. You can find them at endeavournutrition.co.uk. I'll put the link in the show notes. But I've been using some of their supplements for the last few weeks, and these are an evidence-based company. I really don't like to shout out or promote supplements too often because they're full of proprietary blends or sell stuff that's not well researched. But two of the specific supplements that I really like that I'm using at the moment are Locked On, which is their cognitive enhancer. It's a L-tyrosine alpha GPC, which is a choline, a type of choline, L-theanine and caffeine, so cognitive enhancer that I use in the morning when I'm doing some work or trying to focus, and also their Hibernate Deep Sleep product, which is it's a non-proprietary supplement containing 5-hydroxytryptophan, chamomile extract, valerian extract, magnesium citrate, and lemon balm. They've also got a few other supplements as well that I've been using, all researched, all evidence-based dosages, non-proprietary blends. And the guys over at endeavournutrition.co.uk have given me a discount code for people listening to this podcast. So if you go over to their website, you'll find the link in the show notes. You can use the discount code podcast10 to try out some of their supplements. And again, I wouldn't be recommending them if I didn't personally use them or find that they were something that I think people here would like or would get use from. So without further ado, let's get into this podcast with Peter. But final note before we get in, again, second final note, is if you're listening and you do enjoy it, please take a screenshot of this, post it on your Instagram stories, tag myself, let me know what feedback you have if you enjoyed so that you can help share the podcast. But let's get into this podcast with Peter Fitschen. So Peter, thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, we just spoke a little bit off air there, and you mentioned that it's literally been a week since you finished your competitive season. That's crazy. With most shows being cancelled, you're lucky that you even got to compete, right?
Yeah, I mean, here in the U.S., though, things have really, really kicked up from probably late June on, and there have actually been quite a few shows. I mean, just here in the Midwest alone, I mean, there's been shows in Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, multiple shows in Missouri, Oklahoma. Like there are shows. I mean, Indiana last weekend I had a client compete. So Minnesota I did a show in. So there are a lot of shows that are really starting to pop back up here, at least in parts of the country like the Midwest that are more rural and aren't quite as affected.
Yes. So how long were you actually competing for? You said that your season got extended out quite a bit, and
yeah,
I seen that on Facebook that I think you had a couple months gap between when you're supposed to compete initially and then your actual last show, right?
Yeah, so I started pulling back in May of 2019 because the goal was to get me, so May of 2019 through like end of summer, early fall, like position me for a prep, get me closer. And then that would allow me to diet break over the fall when I had clients competing. So I took a diet break for like 6-8 weeks in September through November because I was gone having clients competing like every single weekend. So it was nice. I was able to just maintain through that. And then I was able to drop back into a deficit, and we were targeting March, early April shows. And I did a week diet break. I think I did 2 1-week diet breaks during that last push. And then I was targeting, mid-March, and 6 days out from my first show is when the entire country pretty much shut down. And so, my April shows and my photo shoot and everything got canceled pretty shortly thereafter. And so that led to, me basically extending prep indefinitely until the shows started again. And then once late June hit, and shows were starting, I traveled out of state for 3 shows and a photo shoot here within, basically from June 27th through July 25th, just to get done as soon as possible. So I did a natural pro show in Minnesota, June 27th. I did an untested NPC show where I depleted down and made the 154 pound lightweight class on July 11th. I had a photo shoot in Indiana July 15th, and then I flew to Vegas and finished up my contest season out there July 25th at a smaller AAU show out there. And so, yeah, I still got 3 shows and a photo shoot like I was planning, but it ended, it was like 3.5 months, 3-4 months later than originally planned.
Yeah, you sound like you've got a lot of energy for somebody who's just competed or finished competing.
Yeah, I mean, my food isn't super low. I mean, it got low, so low is relative, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
My off season peaked at like 4,200 calories a day, and when I was younger, like I'm in my mid 30s now, like 4,200 is my off season peak, but when I was younger, it used to be like 52, 54, 5,600
Wow.
a day, when I was in my late teens into early 20s. But I got as low as 2,000 calories a day, which is less than half of my off-season intake. So, just putting that into perspective, like it's
Yeah.
relatively low. It's 2,200 calories lower than my peak off-season intake. Fortunately, after my second show, we started reversing me in, so I was up to about 2350 going into my last show, and then took a pretty significant bump up to almost 3,000 a day initially. I'm still wasn't gaining there, so food's even higher now. Actually, waiting for Cliff to get back to me today to tell me how much higher. But it's going to go up significantly again because I actually lost a pound this last week. We'll be up over 3,000, well over 3,000, I'm sure, starting today and heading back upwards. I know, looking back at my last reverse, I think I had to get up to about 3,600, and then weight started coming back on pretty steadily until I got up into like the low 180s. So I'm assuming I have a really adaptive metabolism, so I'm really good at maintaining. I have to go high to gain, and I have to go low to lose.
Yeah.
That range that I maintain in is pretty wide, which is something that actually helped me during the extending my contest season out. Because I was able to get my food up to like 3,200 calories a day and hold like 5 pounds over stage weight, because my body just maintained so well.
Yeah.
Then I still had to go down to like 2,000 to lose it back off, but that was one thing that helped a lot during that period.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how you found that period, because for me last year, my competitive season, I didn't have to push it out for any bizarre circumstances, but I just extended it because I got qualifications for different shows, and I looked a lot. I mean, relative again, but I looked a lot worse in the final show, and maybe I was a touch leaner, but I could tell from like photos that my shoulders and my arms I was just hemorrhaging muscle from holding that. And I don't have an adaptive metabolism. I mean, obviously it adapts, but if I was eating, I'm 210 pounds now, and I mean, I'm not eating much more than 3,000 calories. So, and I don't diet on much lower than 2,000. I mean, I did a little bit, but I mean, not a whole lot lower, maybe like 1,800, 1,700, but yours fits the mold of what you'd predict a lot more than mine. Mine is a lot wider difference. Which people think is great often, but I mean, even 5,400 calories probably isn't great,
No, it wasn't a lot of fun. I can do 4 pretty comfortably. I mean, once my weight gets up and hunger starts getting lower and I get up to like 190, it gets a little harder. But the 5,000 plus was definitely work when I was younger. But I had to. I mean, I always had a hard time putting on muscle, and that's kind of what needed to happen. But yeah, I think the biggest thing, when you extend like that. So I've had, going back, like I've had clients several times over the years, where they do like a show in the spring and it qualifies them for something in the fall. And in an ideal world, you would do your shows in the spring, and then you wouldn't diet for a show for at least a year if you're trying to look the same, or like longer if you're, trying to be better. Because it takes, 6 months, give or take, for everything to normalize post show. And so if you're competing in like April and May and you have to do something again in October or November, obviously you're going to be starting to diet again from a point where you're less than optimal. And this, I fell in the same situation. And so what you oftentimes find in that situation is, the second push is a lot of times harder than the first, because when you start prep, hormones, metabolic rate are up here, you diet down. And, if you only have 2 or 3 months to be out of a deficit, you can get it maybe back up to here. And then, you got 2 or 3 months to diet back down. And so it's a balancing game, right? So you need to gain enough, you don't want to hold stage lean for like 5-6 months, but you can only gain so much weight back, because the more weight you gain back, the sooner you have to start dieting. And so it's kind of like this give and take and this balance game. And so, yeah, a lot of times we'll put caps of like 5 pounds or 7 pounds or something like that, is all the higher we can allow weight to drift from stage in that situation. But that allows the person to get a little bit more food, trying to find that balance point where it's the best of both worlds. Because if they were to go up 10, 12, 15 pounds, we'd have to diet sooner, and they'd have hardly any time out of a deficit. And that's not going to be the most optimal look on stage. And if you're on the other extreme where you gain no weight back during that time, you're holding stage lean indefinitely. Like, that's not going to be the best look either when it comes. And so it's finding that middle ground. And I feel like I was able to do that. I mean, when I was 5 to 7 pounds up from stage, we set a cap at about 163. And I was walking around probably 155, 156 at my leanest just on regular days. But I mean, carved up like show day mornings, I was like 158, 159. So I was walking, so I was within about 5-ish of carved up stage weight. And I was actually gaining strength back. Like, some of my strength was coming back. It was crazy. Because it was like 8-9 weeks, where my food was high and I was sitting a little bit above stage weight. It was pretty crazy. And I felt like I held size well. It's not the most optimal approach. But I mean, if you compare my pictures from on stage back to like my pictures in March, I didn't really lose any significant amount of size, and my stage weight was around what it was going to be back then. And I don't think I lost a whole lot. Again, I don't know that this is what I'd recommend people do, but I think, it's kind of a side note, but anytime that I have a client or myself in this situation, but a client who has that spring, fall, and they have, where they have to extend for those, extend their season or have a limit to how high we can get food, and then we have to diet right away. The conversation I have with them ahead of time, usually is, hey, if we're going to do this, you are not competing for a long time. Like, you need a long off season. So like, if someone, say in 2020, I mean, this didn't happen because there isn't, hasn't been spring shows in 2020, but if someone, competed spring 2020, qualified for something in fall 2020, the conversation I would have with them then is, hey, we can do this, but you're taking all of 2021 off. Like, you're not competing in 2021. Like, the earliest you would compete in is 2022. And I probably would go longer than that because of the amount of time you're spending near stage weight and in a deficit and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for me, it was like, I didn't have that opportunity to bring my calories up because it was like a show in July. I compete with the WMBF. So show in July in, it's called the Muscle Mayhem. And then, but because I live in Ireland, there's like politics kind of that you have to compete in that show. So I had to compete in the show in September. So I had like 6 weeks. And then I had like...
Were you able to reverse in at least, where you're not pushing for loss and you're able to come up to maintenance?
I suppose for like a week or two, but because I was in like the US, like West Coast US, it's pretty far from me. I mean, it's like 9 hours flight, more maybe. So I took like a bit of a holiday. So like, I mean, I didn't, so I didn't really like reverse, but I kind of just enjoyed myself a little bit more. I didn't go crazy, but I didn't gain a ton of weight, but I was definitely on maintenance and gained a little bit of water weight and stuff. But then kind of when I got home, was maybe about 2 weeks later, I was probably about 4 weeks out or so. And I still wanted to tighten up a little bit from that previous show. So and then after that show, I think I had maybe a 7-week period. And I did try to reverse up a little bit, but then I think just the length of the season from July to November, I was just losing a bit of motivation and stuff. And I started a master's at that time as well in nutrition. And I coach people as well, but I also work a job as well. So the stress was just like really up here. And at that point I was just like, and I was doing a ton of activity because my metabolism is, it's not that adaptive, but I need to do quite a bit of activity to get my weight down unless I want to drop calories really low. So I was doing like 20k steps, which for
Oh
me,
man.
yeah, that's like 2 hours. Literally, it's 2 hours of walking
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I where I work is right beside where I live, so I don't walk very far to work. So
Yeah.
or sometimes I work at home. So like I literally had to walk 2 hours a day plus get my training in, and then plus study. And because I originally had studied like business, so this is years ago, but hadn't been in college for a few years. I was learning, like doing a ton of chemistry background research, studying and learning, and physiology. So I was doing a lot of study, and I was just at that point I was like, I don't want to be eating 1,600 calories anymore. So I think it probably spilled over into my training intensity as well a bit, I'd say, and just that probably didn't lead to the best physique on stage. Because when I actually finished competing, I was like, thank God I'm done. Like I didn't really enjoy the final show that much. It wasn't the best organized as well either. There was like about 500 competitors. I swear to God, I was on stage at like 6 p.m. and then I think I was on stage at 2 a.m. as well.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, that's
So,
not good.
but
Yeah, no.
sorry, what were you gonna say?
Oh, I was gonna say I can relate to that because my 2012 prep, of the 6 times I've dieted down to stage lean since 2004, my 2012 one was the hardest, and that was during what in hindsight was like the worst part of my PhD. Like I had the most going on in the lab. I was getting ready for my quals. I was finishing my last semester of classes. I was kind of starting to coach more people. And then I was dieting for shows on top of all that. And one thing I found, and you may have found this as well, is typically the more stressed someone is, the harder they have to push to get stage lean. Like I like my 2016 prep, I didn't have to push nearly as hard. I shouldn't say nearly as hard. I didn't have to push as hard as 2012, and I got leaner in 2016. And I think large part of that is stress. Like my 2012 prep was one of my toughest. I really did a lot of cardio that prep. My food got down, and I really, and I've seen this with clients also. If someone has a lot going on in life and is super stressed, they can still get stage lean, but it oftentimes takes a lot more pushing. And depending on how hard you're pushing, maybe at some point that starts to affect the look on stage because you're not providing enough calories or enough fuel for workout, training, recovery. So I can definitely relate to, trying to prep for a show during grad school. It's definitely,
no, it's really interesting, like how perhaps cortisol, etc., may affect like the percentage of muscle versus fat that you would lose, and beyond just the water weight, like the kind of the composition of that weight that you would lose is really interesting, and it'd be really hard to study, but it'd be interesting to see in physique athletes, not like not just general people or general population. But I suppose we're kind of took us a while to get into it, but it would be good to talk about, or what we want to talk about was how you would set up contest prep. But before we kind of do that, 20 minutes into this conversation, if you got to introduce yourself, like your background, who you are. I suppose we kind of lost the run of it a little bit, but yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. So I guess my background is on several fronts here. So I have been competing in natural bodybuilding since 2004. I've been training since about 2002. So I got about 18 and a half years of lifting consistently. My first show was almost 16 and a half years ago now. I've dieted to stage lean. I won my natural pro card in 2012, and I've dieted down and competed in handful of pro shows since. I've placed at some. I won a smaller one. And then on the academic side of things, I have a bachelor's in biochem. I minored in nutrition. I have a master's in physiology and a PhD in nutrition. So I got that in 2015. So I went to school for 11 and a half years. Seemed like it would never end. But I've been done for 5 years now. And so I've been coaching full time since. I started my business 2012. Coaching people, kind of part-time as I was going to grad school. And then, it became a full-time thing by the time I was done. And I kind of ran with it starting in 2015. And since then, I wrote a book that came out last year, co-authored with Cliff Wilson, that plug for my book, check it out. And other than that, I guess that's kind of the long and short summary of me.
Yeah, I've been reading a couple of your papers that you've he published. I think I talked to it was Bran. I think it was Brandon Roberts that I spoke to about the off
Yeah,
season recommendations. You were a co-author on that paper, right?
yeah,
I think that's the
yep.
most recent one. What kind of research? Or you're not a primary researcher right at the moment, but what kind of research were you doing back in the day? Your PhD, was it related specifically to physique athletes, or what was it related to?
Yeah, I would say yes and no. So there isn't. So I have published another number of papers over the years related to physique athletes. We did a case study on my 2012 contest prep during grad school, so that was published. That was, I think, the second one to come out. The first one, we were doing it at the same time as Chris Foss's case study, him and Lindy's case study. So we were communicating with them, but we were both doing similar case studies during our same preps because we were prepping at the same time. But it was, at different universities. So that's published. I've published a couple different papers related to supplements and contest prep recommendations and off-season recommendations. So I've co-authored a number of those papers. As far as what my primary was, it is really hard to get funding to study what makes someone huge, but there is a lot of money. Yeah, so like nobody cares about like, hey, what can I do to get as huge as possible? But there is money in the prevention of muscle loss. So typically if you're interested in like muscle growth, things like that, and you need funding to do studies, the side of that has funding is like prevention of muscle loss in populations that are susceptible to it. And so during my PhD, I was working in a lab that works with diet and exercise interventions in dialysis patients and kidney disease patients. And so we had a huge multi-site clinical trial where we were doing exercise and protein supplementation studies, like while patients were doing dialysis, like they would exercise and we give them protein shakes and things, because dialysis is actually incredibly catabolic. And so it makes sense to give protein you lose a bunch of amino acids in the dialysate. It makes it sense to, provide protein at that point. So, we have some studies related to that. We did some antioxidant studies because their oxidative stress is through the roof. So we did some stuff with blood flow restriction training. And so we did, a number of different things. My dissertation study was on HMB supplementation in dialysis patients. And so looking at like prevention of muscle loss, because the HMB literature is, for athletes, it's meh, but for elderly clinical population, those who are susceptible to muscle loss, typically it's those who have an increased protein need that aren't getting that increased protein. You see HMB, at least in the published literature, tends to have an effect. And so nobody had actually looked at it in dialysis patients. And so I got a grant to do that. And we did a 6-month double-blind placebo-controlled trial. It was multi-site at 2 universities, I think 3 dialysis clinics. There's a heck of a lot of paperwork to get that all approved. And we found really nothing. Like it didn't, we had no difference between groups in any measure of like body composition, physical function, quality of life, really anything.
Do you find when you, because I spoke to somebody a while ago who had done a PhD or dropped out of a PhD in genomics or genomic sequencing, and I was saying, like, do you find it disheartening when you spend a lot of time in trying to, you have this hypothesis and you're trying to understand something, and then you just get no result, like not no result, but you get there's no difference, or do you come with the conclusion, well, at least we know we can rule this out from the future, that this doesn't do anything?
I think that's the biggest thing. I would say, that's the biggest thing is we can at least rule this out for, like, hey, this didn't seem to do anything, like it didn't seem to work, so maybe it's not something to consider in the future, and I think, at the time I finished up the study, I mean, it got published in a journal with a decent impact, like Impact 3 or 4, like it isn't a bottom feeder journal and it's not Nature or Science, but like it was published in an okay journal, even with negative results. But I think, the biggest thing for me at that point was when I finished up and I was writing my dissertation, I was trying to my business had basically grown to the point it was a full-time business. I wasn't going to decrease my client load because I wanted to do it full-time when I finished, and and so I was trying to write my dissertation. And so I was just trying to get done. Like I was just happy I had the data analyzed and I was one step closer to being done. And so, I guess you know what I mean? Like, so I was a little skewed at that point where it's like, I got data, I got results. I trust the way the data is analyzed. I trust the way that we measured everything. Everything was blinded. I had no idea. There was only one person in our lab who what group everyone was in, and she took care of pill distribution. We did blood work to confirm who was and wasn't taking the supplements. So like, you know what I mean? Like we were able to measure HMG in the bloodstream. I didn't know who was in what group until the entire data set was like I had everything analyzed. The data set was there. And then I was finally unblinded. It could actually run the statistics. And so I was, you know what I mean? I was confident I did everything I could to do it right. And so it is what it is at that point. Like you can't,
no,
you know
I understand. I understand. So tell me, Peter, then when we're going into this contest prep, to kind of completely segue, what are the first things that you consider when, let's say, somebody comes to you? Is there an ideal time that someone would come to you? I'm sure you get a lot of clients or potential clients that will come to you, I've got a show in 20 weeks, or I want to compete this year in November or something. What's the ideal scenario for you when somebody comes to you? I've got my own opinion, but it would be great to hear kind of what your opinion is in terms of setting someone up for a competition prep before they begin.
Yeah, I think my ideal would be being able to work with them for at least the later portion of their off season. If we're talking like absolute ideal, if I could work with them for part of their off season to make sure we get their food high, kind of position them, okay, you're this far over stage weight, maybe, okay, you're a male competitor. We got you about 30, 35 over stage weight. Your food's super high. We've had a really good gaining phase here. You're seeing visual progress. All right, so now we're 30, 35 over stage weight. We're about a year out, or 10 months out or something like that. Let's start pulling back and kind of position you for prep. So maybe we diet them down, with that initial cut, maybe we diet them down to 20, 25 over, something that's still sustainable for them, because I guess if I back up, we all kind of have ranges of body weight in the off season that we can fall into. For me, like that 180 to 195 is kind of my functional range. The low end of that, when I start getting below 180, I can't get, I start getting into the upper 170s, mid 170s. That's where I start seeing a little bit of strength loss. I have to start pushing a little harder to see loss. It takes next to no effort to diet down to that point, but I got to push harder beyond that. And I start seeing it. It's not an ideal place to sit long term. And then on the high end, when I start getting above 195, I start seeing diminished returns in terms of like, hey, my weight's going up, but my strength isn't anymore. I'm not looking quite as tight. I really have to force a lot of food down to get above that point. And so that's kind of my functional range. So like in my case, if I was 195 at like a year, 10 months, year out, diet me down somewhere around 180, low end of my functional range. Take a diet break there for a month or two, whatever they have time for, whether that's 2, 4, 6, 8 weeks, and get them out of a deficit for a little bit and then go the rest of the way. But ideally, when you're going the rest of the way, I would want them to have more weeks to diet than pounds to lose. So that way when they hit a plateau, they're not falling behind. So it doesn't turn into a situation where it's like, okay, at the start, I have 12 weeks with 12 pounds to lose and, a couple plateaus turns that into like 9 pounds to lose in 6 weeks or something. And we have to go faster than we want. So that extra weeks, will help with plateaus. Also gives us time to take a diet break or two in that last push. As long as things are going smoothly enough, hopefully has them ready early so we can test out some peaking stuff and reverse them in. For example, I have a guy competing this weekend and, we tested 2 or 3 different, he was ready about a month early and we tested about 2 or 3 different things out here over the last month. And we got a pretty good idea of a peaking approach this week that's going to work well. And, stress is low. And so all of those are reasons, so that I guess would be the long story of what I probably would ideally want to do with someone in an ideal world. And I realize not everyone comes to you in that situation. Not everyone can work with you for that long, just financially or just realistically with their life. But if I had an ideal situation with someone, I would start off season and really be able to set them up to do like the cut before the cut, to position them, diet break, go the rest of the way and not have any of that be rushed.
So you say you usually get them like 30, 35 over stage at the initial beginning. And what would that be, let's say their stage weight would be, we're talking 160 or
Yeah,
higher?
that's a theoretical. I mean,
Yeah.
it would depend on the person, right? If someone was 40, 45 over, we probably need to start that cut before the cut sooner. And maybe if there's someone who's 40, 45 over, maybe there's someone who doesn't feel great closer than 25, 30 over. So maybe that's where we got to end the cut before the cut. Or if there's someone who I got a guy in prepping right now who never gets much above 15, 20 over stage weight, feels great, functions well, gets stronger, gets bigger. His case, we just kind of take it in one shot, I don't work with him in the off season, but we can just take that prep in one shot, maybe throw a diet break in if we need it. But he's close enough, you know what I mean? He's close enough that you don't need it.
I think it just depends on if the person is naturally leaner. Not to really buy in too much into the body types, like the somatotypes, but some people are just naturally leaner, like, independent of their environment. For me, I wasn't that lean when I was a kid, so I wasn't fat though, like I wasn't really chubby. But I think the body fat that I'm at now is probably the higher end of the body fat that I naturally would be at. So but I have clients that are literally, like you said, a couple pounds over stage, well, like 10 pounds over, 15 pounds over stage weight, and they're feeling fine, like perfect. And for me, I know myself, I didn't feel normal until like a good bit after my last show, and then also gaining quite a bit of body fat, like time and body fat. So yeah, like you said, it just depends on the person, right? Getting them in whatever body fat they feel good, and making sure that you're not pushing too far above that, or beyond that. So do you always try and fit in some sort of diet break, and is there any particular reason for that? Is it, I suppose it's probably not too much for metabolism, because we've seen that it's not making a huge difference. With that research by Jack and Pios, it doesn't really seem to have huge benefits for metabolism wise, but may help with like maybe hunger or just psychological impacts. And what kind of reasons do you personally add them in, or for what reason do you think they're beneficial?
Yeah, I would say if you can do depends on the length of the diet break. Longer diet breaks, I think, have more of an impact, just in practice, more of an impact on metabolic rate and things like that than shorter ones, which makes sense, right? Like, one day out of deficit doesn't do much, to maybe a little bit, you know what I mean? But longer, maybe, more. I can tell you that, like, even with my last prep, when we took a 6-8 week diet break and I got my food up to I was up to I think 33, 34, 35, something like that, 100 calories a day. And I was holding, somewhere in the low to mid 170s. When I dropped back into a deficit, I was actually getting away with a little bit more food than I was prior to my diet break for the first while. But that was 6-8 weeks and getting my food pretty high. I think there, the longer the diet break, you may see more benefit. It definitely isn't going to hurt. But yeah, I would say also, just from a muscle retention standpoint, if you can have a few weeks where your food's higher, you're going to be able to train harder, have a little more glycogen. That's not a bad thing. So typically it helps a little more fullness. And then, the psychological side of things, I think if you have a long diet, I think that could possibly be the largest benefit is if you have a really long diet, you're someone who has to diet off 35 pounds to get stage lean. If you can take a break in the middle of that for, a month or, whatever, give or take, I think that can help you stay consistent when it's like, okay, now we got to push, for this home stretch. And, it can get rough at the end of prep. Anyone who's been stage lean knows it doesn't feel great. You have to push oftentimes have to push pretty hard at the end. And, if you can have that break in the middle, it kind of helps psychologically kind of go where you need to go. And that doesn't mean I give everyone, not everyone has time to diet break. Not everyone needs one. Not everyone wants one. And I oftentimes will I'm not someone who goes into a prep with a client and says, you're diet breaking, after 4 weeks or after whatever. I don't, you know what I mean? Like, I don't schedule them ahead of time. It's more, when do we need it? So, if progress is really stalling, if they're really struggling to stay consistent, if we're making adjustment after adjustment, and they're not seeing much in terms of loss, like, let's take a step back, diet break for a week or two here, and then get back at it, and oftentimes, whether that be something with stress, cortisol, water loss, or something with metabolic rate, or something with adherence, oftentimes, some combination of that, often, it can be helpful when they drop back into a deficit to get things moving again.
So you probably wouldn't have then a specific standard length of a prep, and I guess it depends on on how much body fat they have over or weight they
Yeah,
have over. But
yeah,
would
because
you say that?
you wouldn't.
Would you say you'd have a prep that's too long? Do you try and stay within a certain period where, like, okay, 12 months is a bit too long here, or do you kind of say let's try and keep it within 8 months or something like that, and be a bit more aggressive? Because you could be so slow or unassertive that you would be losing, point one of your body fat or body weight per
Yeah,
week.
no. I would want to keep body rate of loss probably 0.5% to 1% of body weight weekly, and
Yeah.
so that will keep prep moving, but it's slow enough that based on the data, you don't
Yeah.
see a ton of muscle loss, and especially early on, you can get up closer to 1% or maybe even a little more in those early stages. But at the end, you don't want to be pushing like
Mm.
1.5–2% of body weight weekly. Like that's not
Yeah.
where you want to
Yeah.
be. And so I think if someone has a lot to lose, so I've worked with clients before who want to do a show where they have maybe 50, 60 pounds to lose, like they have a lot to lose. Ideally in that situation, that's where we'd probably break things up and we'd say, all right, let's try to get you 20, like, I don't know if you consider it prep or not. Like, you know what I mean? Like with the diet
Yeah.
breaks in there, like where does prep begin or not? But, with someone who has like 60 pounds to lose, I wouldn't really put a timeline on like we're competing at this date. It'd be more like, let's get 20 pounds off you here. Then let's take a few months out of a deficit. Let's get another 15, 20, you know what I mean? And I would break it up. I don't know that I would try to drop like 60 pounds in one shot. Cause that probably would be a year straight in a deficit, I don't know, just from an adherence standpoint, I can't see that being optimal. And also from a muscle retention standpoint, I mean, just not having that break from that deficit to be able to get some good hard training in there. So yeah, if I had someone who had a lot to lose, I would try to convince them like, hey, let's just aim for like getting some weight off here, some steady loss weekly. Let's take a break for a couple months, get you trained, make sure you're training hard, you're feeling good. Let's go for the next stretch and so on. Rather than saying, yeah, let's diet for 14 months straight or something for someone who had a lot to lose.
Yeah, unless you compete in the IFBB Pro Leagues, they just seem to lose like 60 pounds in 12 weeks.
but drugs can help, make up for a lot of things and help you hold on to muscle. I mean, an enhanced client, I mean, if you're enhanced, you actually are there are a lot of occasions where drug use is going to go up when you're dieting for a show. Like when you stop dieting, after your show, drug use oftentimes goes down. And so your drug use ramps up, and depending on what you were taking before that, how long you've been using, all of that stuff, you can theoretically gain muscle and lose fat with drugs going into a show. And so
Kevin Levrone, right? So didn't he used to take like 6 months off and just go on the piss and play drums and stuff?
Yeah, and so I mean that's a combination of, in that case, muscle memory, great genetics, and drugs, and hard work, and you combine those things, and it makes huge transformations. As a natural though, I would not be looking to add muscle and lose fat at the same time when you're dieting for a show.
Not trying to grow into the show. Yeah, it's not a good approach.
No, no, that's a good approach for not being lean enough.
So when setting up the diet, then do you have any preferential? Are you a guy that likes higher fats or higher carbs, or again, is that really dependent on the client themselves? Do you have any kind of approach that you feel works best for specific lines?
Yeah, I'd say it depends on the person, and a lot of times I try to take what someone's doing and kind of merge what I'm doing in with it, if that makes sense, rather than trying to overhaul everything. And maybe over time it starts looking a little bit more like what I would do, you know what I mean? As long as it's going well. But, if I have someone who's taking in like some monster amount of protein, like, I think we've all had those clients where they come to you and they're like, yeah, I'm 200 pounds, I'm eating 400 grams of protein a day. Obviously I'd pull that back, but like maybe I only pull that back to like 300 a day or something, or 320 or something where it's getting closer to what I would, it's kind of trying to find that middle ground between what I would ideally do and what they're doing, or, if someone is typically eating really low carb and a lot of fat, I might bump their carbs some and pull their fat back some, but it still may be a lower carb, higher fat ratio than I would ideally do. And, if we're making progress there, and you oftentimes get a lot better client buy-in if you know what I mean? You don't just overhaul everything that they're doing, and you try to merge some of these things with, merge ideas, and, I have a client right now who, I a lot of times will have clients who handle a lot of food, do like 5 low, 2 high, and do like back-to-back refeeds each week. And I have a client right now who had always done like 4 or 5 low and 1 high, and just always preferred that. So, we're rolling with that as long as it's going well. And you know what I mean? Like and so I just find that if you can find that middle ground and you get more buy-in from clients, and it's not just so drastically different that you're trying to change everything they're doing. And I think, if you can start making it look a little bit more what you want them to do, and still look like what they want to do, they're probably more apt to stay consistent.
And it's a more client-centered approach, right? So getting them to be a part of the process and making a decision together, rather than you just saying, this is what you're going to do, and then you got to follow it. So,
and I think part of it too is, knowing how advanced a client is and what their background is. Like, if I have like a young 17-year-old kid who's never really hasn't lifted long, or hasn't really competed before, I'll get feedback from them, but like, you got to take it with a grain of salt, right? Like that, whereas like if I have someone who, has been competing for, I got a couple people right now who are dieting for like IP Worlds, who have been competing almost as long as I have, like, and they've done well. They're better bodybuilders, better competitors, more successful than I have been, and so, as a competitor. And so like, I will take their feedback, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't mean that I might not interject my thoughts in there, but, I will definitely put some stock in that feedback, because I know that I can trust what they're telling me. And not that you can't trust what, the 17-year-old newbie is telling you, but like, you got to understand where it's coming from and what their level of experience and things.
One's like based on experience for themselves, and the other is probably just something that he believes or has been told or something. I mean, I was that 17-year-old once, so. So are you, I assume, unless you skipped 17 and went straight to 18.
No, so I spent way too much time between 16 and 18 probably trying to diet and stay lean, and I wasn't very big at my first show. I was 145 pounds on stage, and I was told, and that was 18. I just turned 18, and I was told, hey, you need to get bigger. And so, it was 2004, like, bodybuilding.com forums were like in their infancy. Like, we didn't have all the resources we have today. And so, I went on this like quote unquote clean bulk, that I think a lot of us did earlier in our career. I ate only foods I deemed as clean foods, and I ate a lot of them, and I got up to 210 pounds in a year and a half. So I went from 145 to 210 in a year and a half. And it was ugly. It was not pretty. I am stronger now, like when I'm like 175, 180 pounds than I was at 210 then. And I had a really rough prep after that. I think I dieted off. Competed at 156 the next time around. So in 6 months, I dropped, what is that? 54 pounds.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a quarter of your body weight.
Yeah, that was the roughest prep I ever had. That, and again, that was all very early on. That was when I was like 18, 19, 20 years old. I was doing a lot of that stuff. So yeah, I've been there. I've done it.
No, I did similar stuff. I would take like different brands of protein shakes throughout the day. Like, one would be like Optimum Nutrition brand, because I thought it would make a difference. But yeah, we did a lot of stupid stuff. I'm sure I still do stupid stuff that I'll look back in a few years and think the same. But yeah, so going back to the prep, you touched on it, and maybe it makes sense again that when it comes to refeeds, and in particular, do you add them in for every client, or is it really based on what they've done? Or let's say a client hasn't competed before, how would you implement refeeds, or is that something that you do, or just diet straight through and only add in? So I'm talking about a refeed, I mean like a single day or double day. Do you only add them in when you feel that they're stalling or something like that, or how does that work for you?
No, I'll usually have them in from the start, and we may play around with the frequency and the size of them. Some people can do back-to-back refeeds and not see a huge spike. Some people, like even if your back-to-back refeeds are more moderate, they see a super large spike. But if you just pull that back to one refeed that's a little bit larger, they may not see as much of a weight spike. Because if you see too much of a weight spike from your refeeds, you're just going to end up spinning your wheels. Like the rest of the week is losing the weight you gained only to refeed again and regain that weight. And you just spin your wheels, or either that, or your food has to go super low on those low days to the point it's detrimental to like performance in the gym and recovery. And so, yeah, we play around. I definitely play around with refeed frequency with clients. I'm thinking about it right now. I have a client who's doing back-to-back refeeds every 2 weeks. And I have I have clients who are doing 1 or 2 refeeds a week. I have a client who's refeeding every 5th or 6th day. Some of that is based on their like I said, kind of merging our ideas. And then some of it's based on like, what's happening here? So we try back-to-back refeeds. How low does your food have to get during the rest of the week for that to actually work and you to lose on average? Are you someone who sees a massive spike from that? Or are you someone who handles more, and so a lot of times we'll play around with like, what can we get away with here? Like, what's working here? I mean, ultimately they need to keep progressing. And so some of it's preference, some of it's adherence, some of it is what I want to see, some of it's how they're responding. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily a one size fits all by any means. And so, again, I think, as long, again, some of that incorporating what they like as well, so that, you know what I mean, into what I like and how things are going. I feel like you get a lot better buy-in and a lot better progress. And I think some of that's just adherence and effort as well.
And is there anything in particular that you look for with a refeed? Do you try and see or do you look for a drop a day or two later after the refeed, or if this is success, this is like a quote unquote successful, this refeed is working in the way that I want it to work in terms of getting the weight ticking down? Or what do you look for when you're assessing whether a refeed is working for someone, or it's too high perhaps or too low?
Yeah, so I probably would look at what's happening with their weekly weight averages. Because if you refeed and you see a spike, you're going to go up and then you're going to come back down. And the hope is that when you come back down, the down is lower than the last time before your refeed. But I mean, generally, I would look at weekly averages because that's a lot more meaningful than any one day. And so, what is your weekly average 1 week versus the next? What rate of loss do we need to be seeing, to keep you on track? And are we seeing it? If we are, and you're adherent and you're feeling good in the gym, and, you're not having to go so low on those low days, you know what I mean? Like to see that rate of loss, that you're still performing well in the gym, adherent, I'm good. If that's good. If you're seeing loss, but you're like, hey, like my low days have to get pretty low here, I'm starting to like see that affect my sessions in the gym. Maybe in that case, we think about reducing the size or the frequency of your refeeds to potentially, so that you start seeing that rate of loss while feeling better. Or if we're not seeing that rate of loss, then we need to start pulling things back, whether it be your regular days, your refeeds, what have you. And so I think a lot of it depends on how quick are you losing, how quickly do you need to be losing.
And then I guess when you're assessing weekly losses or a rate of weight loss, do you make sure that someone makes a change, or that they're making progress every single week? Or would you make an adjustment if someone didn't drop within that certain period? I spoke with Brett. What's the second name? He won the lightweight worlds. He's a client of Cliff Wilson.
Oh, Brett Freeman, yeah.
Brett, yeah. I spoke with Brett way back in, I don't know, maybe December, and he said that like every week when he didn't make a loss in weight, it would get like drop of calories or drop of carbs. I wonder what kind of approach you take. Do you always make a change if someone doesn't make a loss, or do you kind of assess what's going on in the lifestyle, and other factors come into play?
Yeah, so I think a couple things. So one is, anyone I have dieting for a show is updating me twice a week. So I have clients who are dieting for shows. They're emailing me either Monday or Tuesday, and then again either Thursday or Friday. So we get an early in the week and a later in the week check-in. That way I'm taking a look at like a running average. We're assessing twice a week. Hey, is it starting to slow down a little bit? Are we good? And some of those updates are short because like they're not going to have a crisis every 3 to 4 days, and some of them are longer and they kind of are what they are. But we take a look and we assess every few days. And so I think by doing it that way, you don't always have to make an adjustment. It depends on the person's timeline though too, right? So I would look at like, okay, so if you're someone who, hey, we've had some issues maybe with adherence, or maybe it's been a tougher prep than expected, and now we need to lose a pound a week, and you're only down like 0.4 on average, like that would be someone where we would have to jump the gun. Like we got to adjust right away. Like we don't have time. If you're someone who, hey, I have 13 weeks to go and I got about 10-ish to lose, you got a couple more weeks to diet than pounds to lose, and it's like, oh, well, you're slowing down. You lost like 0.4-ish. Let's give it a few more days till later in the week. Let's see what happens. Or like if it's a female, hey, it's a week of your monthly cycle. Let's just see what happens, where you stabilize out after, and if that ends up lower. That's where having those extra weeks and time built in can be really, really helpful, because in that case, you don't have to immediately jump and make adjustments. Whereas someone who's tighter on time, yeah, if we're tight on time and you're not losing, like we don't have time to wait and see. And sometimes that may even be due to a lifestyle factor. Like maybe you got 8 pounds to lose 8 weeks, or 8 pounds to lose in 8 weeks, and something lifestyle came up, and affected your weight. So now you have 8 pounds to lose in 7 weeks. We might not have time to wait and see. Like we might have to like adjust, like even though it might not be needed, and so that's where just having time is the most beneficial thing. It is so much easier to slow down a prep when someone's ahead than it is to speed it up.
Mm-hmm. And I guess then, so you just keep that continuous process all the way up until the peak week, or do you have some periods of time where you're trying to assess how do we plan at this peak week? Would you be trialing towards the end of the prep, like different types of refeeds or different amount of carbohydrates to see how they would peak?
Yeah, and so this is where time comes in too, right? Because we would need them to be ready early, because for two reasons. One, when you start trialing different carb loads and adding more food and trialing larger carb loads, you are going to need you're going to probably slower stall loss at that point. Like you're giving them more calories. So like I mentioned, the client I was talking about who's competing this weekend, we've done 2 or 3 different test loads over the last month. His average weekly weight is roughly the same as it was like 3 weeks ago, because we've been, adding calories and trialing different loads. He's not gaining anything, so we've balanced enough low days in there, but he's not losing anymore. But he was ready early, and that's important, because you have the ability then to have time to be able to do some of this. Also, I think it's important that the leaner you are, typically the more carbs you're going to need to fill out, because you're more depleted and going in. And also, if you are trying to like plan, all right, how large does my load need to be? And you're doing that when you're like 5 pounds over stage weight, that's not necessarily going to tell you what it's going to be when you are stage weight. So if you're trying to make that load predictable, you're going to want to be ready a few weeks early so that you can trial some of these loads, and especially if you want to do something aggressive, in order to make peak week more predictable. And if you don't have time to trial, because not everybody's ready early, even there have been preps where we've intended to be ready early and the person isn't because of, whatever the show that they need to do, or the prep was slower, there's some adherence issues, some things came up in life, what have you. Life happens, things happen. And so in those cases, what we typically would do is look at like over the last like 3-4 weeks, like how do you look in relation to your refeed, and at least get some idea of like, are you better the day after your refeed? Are you better 2 days after? Do you look like a watery mess for 5 days after? And at the very least, you can start positioning, knowing where to position a higher carb day during peak week. You might not have time to trial some larger loads or some more aggressive strategies, but you can at least get that far, and have an educated, guess at what you should do the final week. And, if you don't know and you don't have time to test, it's always best to be conservative. It's just so much safer, and then you can always be a little more aggressive the next time if you need to be.
Mm.
But yeah, I think that would be my thought is yeah, absolutely. You in an ideal world, ideal prep, they'd be ready 3-4 weeks early so we could test some of that stuff.
And then how do you, going into the final week, is peak week always a week? So I know a week is 7 days, but is your peak week, does it last for most clients, or would you set it up as a week? And do you make any manipulations? Obviously in carbohydrates, we kind of just talked about
Yeah.
it, but other variables, do you manipulate? Do you manipulate sodium or water at all? I know it seems like it's quite taboo in natural bodybuilding, but then again, I do see some coaches that actually get really good results do manipulate it to an extent, at least.
Yeah, I don't know that I manipulate water really much. I try to keep that fairly consistent for most people and consistently high. Sodium, depending if someone's loading really, really hard, I might bump a little more sodium along with the carb load, and kind of bring sodium up some with carbs. But as far as things that change, when it comes to carb loading, some people simply look better if they load earlier in the week and kind of deplete back down later in the week. I've worked with a number of people who they look better 2 days after a high day. So maybe we load Thursday or load Wednesday, Thursday, and make Friday a little more conservative. Some people may look best after one really large load on like Friday, maybe with or without a depletion ahead of time. Some people may look better if they load kind of more gradually over multiple days, and maybe like Thursday, Friday, or Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or Tuesday through Friday, something like that. We gradually work carbs up over the course of the week. People definitely differ in terms of when they look best, and the pattern that works best for them. And so that, I've talked to, one of my friends who was getting into coaching was asking me about this because he's like, that's something you can't really science your way through. And I said, no, not really. Like, I don't know why some people look better 2 days after a carb load and some one day after, you know what I mean? And all of that, like there's just is some differences from person to person. But as far as other things that would change, I would say fairly universally, unless someone has more weight to lose. If someone has more weight to lose, ideally we'd be targeting a later show, but if that's not possible, then maybe we have them train hard through most of the week, just trying to get as much fat off as possible. But in a situation where that's not the case, I generally start backing training off the final, over the final week, especially the later days, so that they're not sore on stage, so we're not causing a bunch of inflammation. Oftentimes I'll back off on cardio. I'll back off on, even like steps a little bit. But you don't want to go too crazy backing off daily activity the day before your show. One mistake I think a lot of people make is, they'll travel to a show Thursday if they travel a ways to the show, and then they'll if there's someone who has a larger load on Friday, they'll load Friday, but then they'll just lay around in their hotel room and wonder why they're looking worse during their load than when they tested it previously. And a lot of times it's because you're not moving as much. And so not that you want to go crazy moving a ton and burning off all the carbs you're trying to put down and to fill.
There we go.
Hey, there you are. There we go. Okay, so, and yeah, I don't know where you lost me, but anyway, so yeah, the day before the show, a lot of people when they're loading, they'll lay around their hotel room and load, and they'll look worse. And so you want to keep moving that day, at least, not excessively to burn off all those carbs, but you want to keep moving just to make sure, one, that you don't have a significant drop in energy expenditure to where like, hey, now I spilled on an amount of carbs I should be able to handle because I'm not expending as much energy on this day. And two, muscle contraction and movement increases insulin sensitivity and helps with glucose uptake. You're very insulin sensitive after a workout. So oftentimes if someone's doing a really, really large load, I may even have them do like a light pump workout in the morning, another light pump workout at night. And we may still have a step minimum that day that maybe is a little bit less than their norm, but not much, so that they're not burning fewer calories and so that we keep them, insulin sensitive and keep the load going efficiently so that they're not a watery mess and are able to assimilate the carbs during the load.
Yeah. I think it's important to minimize stress, at least in the last week, in the last couple of days. I noticed before I had a competitor who went to the Arnold Classic Europe, and he was looking great, and then the last few days they messed up with the tan and the timing and everything. It was really badly run show, and he was just like really super stressed, and on stage he just looked like he gained like 3 pounds of fat, which at that level, body fat is it can take you from first position to second last position. And then for me personally, I remember the first show I did last competitive season. I live in Ireland, so the weather is just shite all the time. So it never gets too warm and it rains a lot. So when I went to California, it wasn't my first time there, but it's the first time there in a couple of years. And the weather is just, as you know, if you've been there, it's just great in July. So I went to Venice Beach and stuff, and I went like 5 days before my show, and I was competing in Sacramento, so I did a road trip, and I was just like really relaxing, like nothing stressed me out. And man, I looked so sharp like after a couple of days. It didn't really drop much weight, but like it just looked like tightened up. All the water weight just completely dropped from just de-stressing and just relaxing. And that was like so important to making me come in really good on stage. And then I think the opposite happened when later shows, when I was like I mentioned with my client, it's like super stressed, just didn't really want to be there, just like logistics were kind of messed up, and then just on stage just didn't really look right, even though body weight wasn't that much different. So yeah, and like you mentioned as well, it's important not to change too much with your clients as well. I remember another client that really wanted to train before the day before and not reduce it because he'd always done it. So I didn't want to, even though physiologically that may affect him by training, I didn't want to take it out where he's stressed then because he's not training, because it could have the opposite effect. But then do you do anything with sodium on show day or the day before? Do you? I know it probably depends again on the amount of carbs that someone's having, but do you have them have a higher sodium day before the show or the day of the show?
Oftentimes morning of the show, I'll give them a shot of sodium, especially as they start pumping. Get a good shot of sodium there. That oftentimes helps bring out vascularity, helps get a better pump. I definitely I don't bring it down necessarily. Probably up maybe slightly, depends on the load and the client. But one thing I was going to say with the stress and everything as well is oftentimes if possible, I always try to encourage clients to travel to a show on Thursday. If it's a Saturday show, don't travel on Friday, because if you travel on Friday, you run into traffic issues. You get there late, you run into your drug test, you got to get tanned. Like it just turns into a stressful, rushed process. But if you can get there Thursday, and even better yet, if you can stay at a place that's not the host hotel so that you can just get away. Like I never stay at the host hotel when I'm competing. Like I stay somewhere else. I'll go find an Airbnb nearby, another hotel nearby, whatever. If I can just get my own space, it's away from the contest. It isn't all about the contest. Friday, I can watch a movie, I can take a nap, I can, you know what I mean? I'll still have to move, I'll still have to pump, I'll still have to tan, I'll still have to check in. So there's things you got to do. But like, if you can just make it relaxed, go for a relaxing walk outside. I watched a movie before a couple of my shows on the Friday during the day. Like it was not, you know what I mean? Like it was, I just was able to relax and kind of get away and have kind of a day for me. And it was, it helps a ton versus just being super stressed going in.
Yeah, for sure. I was just thinking when you mentioned that, the last polygraph or test I did in my last show was really stressful. The guy was just super, I think he was like an ex-cop, and he was like,
a lot of them are.
He was like super hard, as if it's as if you're guilty and then you have to prove your innocence. And I was just like, that actually could affect how I look on stage. That's my excuse anyway, and that's why I didn't win. But Peter, it's been great chatting to you. Thanks so much for your insights. Where can people find more about you, and what are you up to? Over the next couple of months, is there anything interesting? Are you bringing out any more books or anything else?
No more books or anything like that. I think the biggest thing over the next couple months is just trying to transition back to like normal life, because my prep got extended so long. So just getting back to finding more balance. And then I have quite a few clients targeting shows here. I got a couple competing in August, and then like September, October, I have a lot of clients targeting shows. And at this point, there's still a lot of shows scheduled in the U.S. because so many got pushed back this year. For September, October. So I'm going to be doing a lot of traveling to client shows, assuming that everything still happens. And a lot of it here depends on the restrictions in certain states versus certain cities so there are parts of the country where things are happening more than others, depending on like political, law stuff. yeah, so I mean, that's the biggest thing. I think just finding balance. There's some projects around my house I'd like to catch up on. Things like that got pushed to the wayside during prep, and finding more balance. And then worrying about my clients who are competing this fall. I got my shows out of the way right away as soon as they started again. So now I can focus on my clients and my stuff's done, which was my intention back in the spring, and it just kind of happened now in the summer. But yeah, I've had, I think, 4 clients compete already this year, and I got another one this weekend, so there'll be 5, and, just since the end of June. So I definitely have having clients step on stage. Other than that, no books or anything like that. Hopefully once things get back to a little bit more normalcy, I'd start doing some more talks again, maybe next year. I think last year I traveled for half a dozen talks or more, seminars and things. And I've had some talks with people even internationally about doing it, but the world needs to get more normal before I can do some of that again. But as far as where people can find me, I'm on Instagram at FitBodyPhysique. I'm on Facebook just as myself. They can email me at fitbodyphysique@gmail.com. They can pick up my book on Amazon. It's called Bodybuilding, the Complete Contest Preparation Handbook. I co-authored with Cliff Wilson.
It's got Sam Okinola on the front, right?
Yes, it's got Sam Okinola on the front, and then one of Cliff's IFBB Bikini Pro clients also. Yes, and then on the back, I think it's Doug Miller, Figure Miss Olympia. Several. I think Valentine Azuga is on the back. There's several people on it, but and in it. Getting those pictures was a lot of work, but for it to be high enough resolution, to be big enough, and to be stage shots of them alone, and get all the legal rights and stuff. But I think we're both really happy with how it all came together.
Great. Awesome, man. Well, thanks once again for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I hope you enjoyed that podcast with myself and Peter Fitschen. If you want to find out more about Peter, I've left all his social media links and his website, etc. in the show notes. But I think if you search Fit Body Physique, you'll find pretty much everything related to him. And if you want to find more about me or follow me, you can get me on Instagram at AdamMac192. And I always do appreciate when people leave me feedback, whether that's positive or negative. I always want to try and improve the podcast. And if you're still listening and are interested in learning more about natural bodybuilding and how to prepare for a natural bodybuilding show, or simply just want to get to very lean levels of body fat, you can go to my website, healthmastery.co, and sign up for the free 7-day natural bodybuilding fast track course, where I give you a lesson every single day, which is like 15 to 20 minutes on various topics related to natural bodybuilding. Some of them we even spoke about today. But I thank you for listening, and I will join you again in a future conversation when we have on more great guests like Peter.